All right, we're back again with the man, Steven Lassen. Not a Tuesday, it's going to be a Wednesday this time around, but we do appreciate weekly chats here. Senior editor over at Athlon Sports, Steven Lassen. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, Mike, it's going great, man. What a crazy week since we last talked. Coaching changes, more transfers. I keep saying it, but I keep waiting for the offseason to start. I'm not sure it's ever going to end for college football because before you know it, the second signing day is going to be here. We're going to roll right into spring practice. So, man, a lot to catch up on, I guess.
Right. And obviously with Nick Saban no longer in the SEC as a head coach, I thought it was a perfect time to do an updated SEC coaching rankings. Heading into 2024, Texas and Oklahoma obviously coming in, so that shakes it up as well, Steven. We just had on, I believe, was it Monday? January 15th, the NFL deadline to declare early for the NFL draft. So we're going to talk winners and losers across the SEC with the early entrance to the NFL. But before we get to that, Steven, some exciting news that people are just going wild over this, and I'm among them, Steven. The next EA Sports college football video game, according to Gator David Waters, friend of the show, he is citing multiple sources that July 12th is when that game will be released. I've not officially seen this confirmed by EA Sports, Steven, but it was interesting. After all the hoopla from the national championship, we were all expecting something. I caught it. I went down a YouTube rabbit hole, as I often do, and the president of EA Sports was on this. I think it's called Spotico, something like this. Little known show. It only had 1,000 views, and this was like a month ago. This guy did this interview, and he said the game is full on track to be released in the summer. So calming those fears. So that's a credit to Gator Dave. He's probably on to something here. July 12th is unofficially the release of the next college football video game after a 10-year hiatus. What's your thoughts, Steven, on the release of this game?
Clear my calendar. Don't schedule. Let's hope for the college football gods that nothing happens on July 12th. It is going to be a little different though. Because back in the day, it sounds like we're like ancient here, but you had to go wait in line for the game. Like it came out at midnight. And I remember, going out there at, whatever, 11:30, 12 o'clock, wherever it was to go get the game. Yeah. And I had to have it that first day. It's going to be a lot different now. Like everybody's going to be flooding like the EA and Microsoft servers to go get the game. But man, I can't wait. One of my favorite things to do was to do the Dynasty. And you would do all the recruiting and you could simulate the season. Yeah. And it would take so long on the PlayStation that I would just set it, go to sleep, wake up and, recruit and then go through the next cycle and take these mini naps as you simulate a season. So, man, I'm just excited for the game. I like just pencil me in for July 12th, the 15th, whenever it is. It's before media days. I'm just ready for it to get here.
Right. And to your point, Steven, you just jogged my memory. Also, one of my worst memories as a child. Of course, nothing's as bad as it seems back then. But same situation. Like you said, they wouldn't sell you the game till midnight. So dumb. The day before, and I went at the mall. Of course, they got a EB Games, whatever, what have you. And I went to go see a movie. I think it was called Superman Returns, and I didn't realize how long this movie was. It was an awful movie. I went in, at like 9:30, 10 or something like that. I figured, this will be perfect. It'll end right before midnight. I can go over to EB Games, get my game. But this movie drug on and on and on. And all I kept thinking was, man, I cannot wait for this to end. So I go get my video game. And it ended around 12:15, 12:20. I went out, walked to the store. The guy literally closed the gate on me. He's like, we waited, for 10 minutes, and everybody that showed up early got their game. I had to come back the next day. So that was one of the worst nights of my life as a child.
Man, you needed to run an up-tempo offense that day. You needed that Josh Heupel tempo to get you in and out of the movies. Man, I have to admit, I guess I don't have a bad story like that. I guess one thing I am wondering about is how they are going to navigate all of like the transfers and how do you do NIL.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also curious who's on the cover.
Yeah.
Is it Jaden Daniels the Heisman winner? Is it Caleb Williams? Is it Nick Saban? I don't know. There's so many unknowns. It's going to be so different than the ones we played on, PlayStation or whatever. I think what's also fascinating to me is how I enjoyed playing the game, but it was almost the like I said, the dynasty, the other stuff, the stuff that you didn't actually have to do on the field was actually more or just as entertaining to me.
When you fire up for the first time, Steven, July 12th, you start a dynasty. Who's your number one team that you're dying to start a dynasty with? Because I know if you're anything like me, I'll probably have like a dozen dynasties with 12 different teams. But I'm just curious, who's that first one? Are you going to the top of the heap, Georgia Bulldogs or Alabama, something like that, or you go to the lower level, try to work up the mountaintop?
I should say, first of all, as my alma mater, Austin P, I'm going to guess is probably not available for a dynasty. So they didn't even call me to serve on the coaching search committee this year. So that speck of carpet that tuition probably paid for in that communication building is probably all I'll get. I have a soft spot for all like the really difficult jobs in college football. So like Eastern Michigan or New Mexico State. So I'll probably pick one of those and start a dynasty with them.
Oh, good luck! Good luck bringing them to the 12-team playoff that it'll be
Yeah.
in this version of the game. But hey, Steve, we're here to talk actual football, and really wanted to hit on it because I figured you'd be the best person to ask about this. The player the deadline just passed, like I said, January 15th, I believe, was the official deadline for players to declare early for the NFL draft. It's very confusing because there are many players that were seniors last year that had an extra year. If you were in college football in the year 2020, of course, the COVID year, they give you a free season of eligibility that you don't have to take. So there may be some guys here that I miss, but this is officially from the NFL, Stephen, of the players that have declared early for the 2024 NFL draft. I'm going to go by it team by team real quick here. Alabama, Terry and Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry, the two outstanding corners. J.C. Latham, offensive tackle, and Dallas Turner, edge defender, pass rusher extraordinaire. Arkansas, they only had one, the kicker, Cam Little. Georgia, star-studded lineup here, tight end Brock Bowers, of course. Offensive tackle, Marius Mims. Corner, Kamari Lassiter, and safety, Javon Bullard. Kentucky, outstanding linebacker, Trevin Wallace. LSU hit pretty hard. Receivers, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., and then on the defensive line, Mason Smith, Makai Wingo. Missouri, their outstanding corner, Enos Rakestraw Jr., off to the NFL. Tennessee running back Jalen Wright declared early. And then Texas also hit pretty hard. Jonathan Brooks, running back. A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy at receiver. Travion Sanders, tight end, outstanding tight end. And Byron Murphy, defensive tackle. So those are all the players that, according to the NFL, have officially declared early for the NFL draft. Who you got as winners of the deadline here, Stephen?
Yeah, I think first of all, as you were reading those names off, it's like the who's who of college football for all Americans. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some heavy hitters gone to the NFL. I think in terms of winners, the first team that comes to my mind, and they sort of been an offseason winner overall, and that's Ole Miss. They didn't have really anybody that they could, I guess, declare early. I guess Jackson Dart was one name we were kind of watching for. You also look at Trey Harris, Caden Prescorn, all those guys coming back. Also, one of my favorite players, JJ Pegues, whether he's playing quarterback, running back, fullback, defensive line, whatever, coming back next season. So I think Ole Miss is a winner. Largely, the teams around them they will be competing with in the standings lost players, but they're bringing back pretty much everybody next season in terms of potential draft stock. So again, I think the Ole Miss Rebels continuing to win this offseason.
Right, and I have my own list of winners and losers here, and Ole Miss, to your point, Stephen, right at the top of that list. They're making so many ways for their NIL and what they're adding via free agency, as Lane Kiffin calls it. But what's really the heart and soul of why this team is projected where they are next season is this core nucleus coming back for another season. So I agree 100%. Ole Miss deserves to be in the winner spot. Who else gets your a spot in your winners category?
Yeah, I think Arkansas is a winner here. Obviously KJ Jefferson transferred out, but I think just keeping guys like Landon Jackson, Andrew Armstrong, two key pieces for this team, could have left, could have went to the NFL. And for a team like Arkansas that is going to be fighting to improve, for fighting for bowl eligibility, to be able to keep two pretty big pieces in an offseason where obviously the Petrino news was great, but you go back to the end of 2023, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of disappointment over the season, but good coordinator hire, not to mention keeping two key pieces. I think Arkansas is a winner here. Obviously, they're losing McLaughlin to the NFL, but Jackson and Armstrong coming back is huge.
Yeah, that's a good point, Stephen. I mean, Landon Jackson, he may be the best pass rusher. I wouldn't cement him as the best, but the way he progressed, his couple of seasons there in Fayetteville after transferring in from LSU, yeah, he firmly belongs in the discussion as one of the best pass rushers in the SEC. And again, if he continues to make those progressions, he may finish the season as the best pass rusher in the SEC. So that one in particular, that was pretty massive.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think if you look at who's coming back next season in terms of production for tackles for loss, it doesn't necessarily mean everything as far as getting to the quarterback. But he and James Pierce are going to be the top two next season. So when we start thinking about best linemen coming back in the conference, Landon Jackson is up there. And certainly, I think you brought up a good point there. Defensively, as far as his progression from 2022 to 2023, obviously took a big step forward. So in theory, if you're in Arkansas, you're kind of hoping that he makes another step forward next season. So just being able to keep him is huge for a team that kind of just need some good positive offseason news, and that's a big part of that.
Right. And speaking of Tennessee, Steve, they made my list. Maybe a little Homer pick here, but Cooper Mays, Amari Thomas, John Campbell, both offensive linemen, Brew McCoy, Keenan Peely. I think this is a strong core for Tennessee seniors, leaders in the front seven here. And of course, Brew McCoy at receiver. They needed some continuity there to help along Nico. Did Tennessee make your winners?
Absolutely. I'm in agreement with you. I think anytime you can keep senior upperclassmen offensive linemen in the program, that's a win for you. I also think too, just Amari Thomas, getting him back on the defensive front is significant. A healthy Brew McCoy, you add in him to, Tennessee's receiving core with Brazel transferring in from Tulane. There's a lot of giving Nico the offensive line and the weapons to succeed right away is huge. And of course, you and I have talked about the running backs they're going to have next season, despite losing Wright and Small early to the NFL. I think Tennessee's a winner here, just keeping those guys at the line of scrimmage. It's a line of scrimmage league. They're going to be able to better protect Nico next year as a result of this.
Mm-hmm. Any other teams stand out to you as winners here?
I think Florida's a winner here. I think keeping Jason Marshall, kind of the same thing with Arkansas, is you need talent on this defense. This defense has got to get a lot better, and keeping Jason Marshall, even if he has ups and downs during the 2023 season, he's a corner with some potential. Another offseason, maybe he can take a step forward. Keeping him in the program is huge. And also, Cam Jackson up front, back for Florida, and Graham Mertz too. Probably the biggest surprise in the SEC this season. Florida is better equipped. If they had to change quarterbacks this season for 2024 with Lagway transferring in, but I just think getting him back for another year, that development within the system, the step forward that he took, Florida is starting from a good place at quarterback this year. So I think Florida's a winner. They didn't really, like I said, they didn't really lose a lot, but getting those guys back is pretty big for this program as they try to improve next season.
Yeah. And, one thing that I'm glad you said that, Stephen, but slightly off topic, but them adding Ron Roberts officially as a co-DC linebackers coach, basically, replacing Jay Bateman. But he's worked with Austin Armstrong, the defensive coordinator. He's worked with Billy Napier, obviously the head coach at Louisiana. So a lot of familiarity there. And, let's call it what it is, Stephen. Billy Napier is entering maybe one of the hottest seats in the country. And maybe that's not fair, but just projecting ahead, looking at his schedule. I mean, they need a massive step forward if they're going to keep Billy Napier employed there. So with those additions that you just put them in the winners column, I heard a lot of defensive players there that you referenced with Ron Roberts, a very experienced defensive coordinator all across college football. I certainly didn't think his Auburn defense last year was the problem. It was clearly the offense. He was at Baylor that when they won the Sugar Bowl. He's had other stops. What do you think with those players and Ron Roberts coming in to lend Austin Armstrong a hand? Could the Florida defense be one of the most improved units in all of the SEC?
I think if you're a Florida fan, I think you should have some optimism about this group. I think first of all, it's kind of this scenario we set up here. I think number one, you're getting some guys back that could have left. You're also upgrading on your defensive staff. Getting Ron Roberts, I think, is pretty significant. His defense was not the problem at Auburn. Now you're bringing him to a place where he has familiarity with the head coach. Austin Armstrong was kind of considered kind of a rising star, but over 33 points a game in the SEC this year is not going to get it done with a coach on the hot seat. So you're bringing in a veteran to sort of tutor this group in 2024. So the other reason I think I'd be optimistic here for improvement is if you look back at last year, Florida's just depth chart or tacklers or who played, it's a lot of freshmen, sophomores. It's a lot of guys who are coming back next year. So in theory, and I think this is the case that sort of, if I was Billy Napier, I would be making is, hey, going into year 3, we've got a lot of guys who have played the last 2 years. They can take a big step forward next year. We've upgraded our staff. We've got another great recruiting class coming in. So in theory, I like this Florida defense to be better. How much better? Once we get past kind of the transfer portal and we can kind of get a final depth chart, I think we'll have a better idea here. But I would be surprised if they give up about 33 points a game in the SEC next year, even with that difficult schedule.
Yeah, and the schedule didn't get any easier, Stephen, when Cam Ward committed to Miami, and that's what they play in the opener in the swamp. They better show up in that matchup, otherwise, oh man, I don't even want to think what could happen down there in the swamp. You know what?
But think about that game for both teams, really. I mean, you look at what Florida State's just finished 13-1. Miami's had the snap debacle against Georgia Tech, and they've been kind of disappointing for 2 years in a row. So I think if you're Florida, it's an opportunity here. Like, hey, you've got a kind of a Miami team that has underachieved a little bit. You got a chance to get a good win against a team you're going to be recruiting against for sure in the state. So we'll find out right away. One of these fan bases is going to be very, very angry come the first weekend of September.
Now, my biggest winner, I'm interested to hear what you think of this, Stephen, in the transfer. I'm so used to saying portal now, but the NFL draft deadline, to me, it's the Georgia Bulldogs, Stephen. The moment Carson Beck made the decision to come back, I was ready to say Georgia's preseason number 1. And that's, it's not to say they will go untested by any means, but Carson Beck coming back, Smile Munden, the linebacker, Tate Ratledge, Xavier Truss, Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson. Same things we've kind of echoed about Tennessee can be said about Georgia, getting stout on that line of scrimmage. That's where Georgia has excelled in their national championship runs. I think they're poised to excel once again with some of these returners next season. And the biggest question mark arguably they had last year was at quarterback, just the unknown of Carson Beck. He's no longer a question mark. He's got to be a front runner for all SEC, maybe even all American heading into the season.
Yeah, it's funny. I was doing my list and I was trying to figure out what to do with Georgia, because when you look at the players who are losing, I mean, it's significant. You've got guys like Javon Bullard, you've got Kamari Lassiter, you mentioned Brock Bowers, Cedric Van Pran's off to the NFL as well. They're losing a lot. But I'm with you, though. I think they have to be a winner here, just simply because they are getting back one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And you could make a case that, yeah, they are losing Amarius Mims, but the offensive line is a position they have done a very good job of developing and turning over year over year. But when you get Truss and Ratledge back on the offensive line. Two guys who are probably going to be all SEC. I don't think you're worried too much about that group if you're Mike Bobo. So you're keeping for sure one of the best quarterbacks in college football, and you're also getting back a couple guys on the line of scrimmage that are going to be crucial next season. So a big reason why I like Georgia won for 2024 is Carson Beck's return. So I think they're a winner certainly because of that.
Right. And to your point, I mean, Bowers, first round lock, barring some crazy event or something. Amarius Mims, I have to believe he's a first round lock. And then Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard. I mean, they're going to be draft picks. So they're not losing nobodies, to your point, but they're just uniquely qualified to handle these departures seemingly annually now, just like Alabama has for decade plus under Nick Saban, where you're losing a ton, but you're bringing in just as much talent and now returning quite a few guys. So that's why I've got them as a winner. Any other teams stand out as draft deadline winners?
Yeah, I think South Carolina. I mean, obviously losing Spencer Rattler is pretty significant, but I think Lenora Sellers is very capable and also a very intriguing quarterback for next season. So it is a loss, but also I think if you're South Carolina, just to get the volume of guys coming back, I mean, whether it's, Hemingway and Sanders up front, you could look at, Williams and Fortune as well coming back for this defense. So it's almost a volume thing. South Carolina, very difficult schedule, a lot of injuries this season. One way to overcome that next year is to have a bunch of guys come back and try to make this better in 2024. So I think if you're South Carolina, obviously you're losing your quarterback and Juice Wells transferred to Ole Miss, but getting these guys back is a good place to start, the hope for improvement next year.
I'm confused at those kind words you have for Sellers based on these YouTube comments. Stephen, they're ripping you to shreds for putting him so low in the quarterback rankings, but again, he's not done anything in meaningful action, so I get it, but I think you're a wanted man in Columbia right now.
I guess it's a good thing I don't have a vacation plan there. You can't go to Kentucky. I can't go to South Carolina.
Well, all right. So let's transition to the losers, Stephen. I'm curious to see if you got the same losers of the draft deadline with all these players off to the NFL. Who kind of highlights your list of losers here?
Yeah, I think these are four teams that lost a lot of talent, and no surprise, like these are guys that are going to be picked pretty high in the draft. So we'll start with Texas, losing Xavier Worthy, losing Jatavian Sanders, A.D. Mitchell, Byron Murphy. I mean, those are, four guys who were all Big 12, all America caliber players. Texas has done a really nice job of reloading in the transfer portal at receiver. So they have alleviated some of that loss. But I think Worthy and Sanders and certainly Mitchell are pretty special players. So I think Texas is a loser because they're losing so many guys who are going to be picked high in the NFL draft. Obviously with A&M, Aniyah Smith, Edge Cooper, Layden Robinson, McKinley Jackson, four guys that Mike Elko really could have used this year, going to be high picks next year. So just adding to the transition year at Texas A&M with those four losses. On Alabama, I mean, you look at the loss of who's leaving Tuscaloosa. It is, like I said, it is a who's who of departures with Dallas Turner, J.C. Latham, the two corners, McKinstry and Arnold. So I think in a sense of Tuscaloosa, there's a lot of change for next year with Kalen DeBoer coming in and all these high picks leaving. It's going to be a different year in Tuscaloosa. I think it'll be curious to see where this team, once we get past the portal deadline and get closer to spring, what the depth chart looks like for next year. And I mentioned LSU. I mean, obviously, I think pretty highly of Garrett Nussmeier next season, but you lose Jaden Daniels, you lose Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, and also maybe the group that gives you the most concern is the defensive line. Obviously, hiring Bo Davis to be your defensive line coach is a big deal, but a group that might be a little bit thin on paper, and Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith off to the next level. So I think LSU lost in the NFL draft deadline.
Yeah, you just hit on all the losers. My top three was LSU, Texas, and Alabama, but certainly great points made for A&M. I would imagine some of that has to do with just the fact, everybody there signed up to play for Jimbo Fisher. Of course, you can make the argument some of them probably had connections to Mike Elko. So, but they may have already made the decisions before even Mike Elko was hired. So that's why maybe I didn't quite put them in the losers category. But those are good points made by you. But what's unique about this, Stephen? LSU, Texas, Alabama, and we even talked a little bit of Georgia and A&M. Not that Georgia was a loser here, but they came close. These are the kind of the 4 or 5 programs most uniquely adept to filling the shoes of players sent off to the NFL. So it's a little bit different if, say, Kentucky was devastated by guys going early in the NFL draft. LSU, Texas, Alabama, I think they're going to be just fine from a talent perspective. You know what?
Absolutely. It's almost like a turnkey operation. I mean, you're just the one wave of talent leaves, the next wave of talent is ready to step into the program. And certainly, I mean, you look at the early top 25s, which are going to change a lot because of what's happened. But, Texas is picked by most in the top 5. Alabama we'll see what happens now once we get a better evaluation of the Kalen DeBoer era. But LSU's top 10, top 12, 15. A&M's right there in the top 25. So, I mean, there's a lot of talent leaving, but a lot of talent coming back, largely due to what's happened in the high school recruiting ranks, which is really, I mean, that's where that same thing with Georgia. It's got to start there. You've got to build your base foundation from the high school ranks and then be able to supplement quickly from the transfer portal. And we're seeing all 4 of those teams are certainly doing it this offseason.
Right. So now, Stephen, I really want to. We're going to piss off about half the SEC right here, but it is what it is here because
Mike, I guess I'm not even going to be allowed in South Carolina even more after this. So
we have decided to rank the SEC coaches. Natural that we wanted to do this with the GOAT gone from the game, at least as a head coach. Certainly in Alabama here. So that just kind of blows up the SEC coach rankings heading into 2024. We're adding Texas, we're adding Oklahoma. So these lists get a little bit longer, a little bit more difficult to do because we don't really know how Venables and Sarkisian truly will do with an SEC slate. We got a couple of new coaches here. So before we get into all that, Stephen, did you have any overarching thoughts or anything before we get into, and Steven's done a list, I've done a list, so we'll kind of go back and forth, but any overarching thoughts as you tried to put this list together?
Yeah, I was curious what other states I'm going to get banned from in the next couple of minutes here as we talk on the show. I think it is I think there was a moment that hit me after Nick Saban retired where at any point in like the last 10 to 12 years, if somebody came up to me and said, who's going to win the national championship? Alabama probably would have been the first team that came to mind. And now it's definitely Georgia. But there's such a void in the coaching ranks when you're taking away the best in the game. I think he's the best coach of all time. And you have such an interesting group that it was always Saban versus Kirby. Now I think the whole dynamic of the SEC has changed. I think it is way more wide open, especially in the kind of after the obvious one. And once you get into the middle and into the kind of the back of the league where some of those coaches have something to prove. So I think I had a harder time this year putting this list together maybe than other years. The other thing is too, and I feel like all of these coaches, and I'll be curious when we sit down later this offseason and do a full 1 to 134. A lot of these guys are going to be in the top 25, but it also feels like it's not, I wouldn't say underwhelming. It's just kind of a group that just feels like it's a solid group of coaches, but maybe the star power that maybe we've seen in some of the years isn't there. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I got you, Stephen. And I mean, the SEC is where coaches' dreams go to die. I mean, they all hire, great I mean, Billy Napier had a stellar reputation 3-4 years ago. I mean, he would have been a candidate to replace Nick Saban. He's not now. I mean, this is just such a meat grinder, and it'll burn you out. And I can already see the mentions. I don't care where we put Drake. It's not going to be high enough for Mizzou fans. They would have ran his ass out 3 months ago. You know what I mean? Like, it can flip too. 1 minute you're hot, 1 minute you're not. One minute you're not, one minute you're hot. You know what I mean? I mean, Josh Heupel, if we did this a year ago, I saw lists, legitimate lists that had him, within like the top 6, 7 coaches in the country. They don't have him there now. Now that doesn't mean he's awful, but things can change. So it's kind of hard. Not all these coaches have the same number of years. Some of them certainly don't have the same experience in the SEC. So how do you evaluate them? So I'm going to try to do my best. And I pulled a page right out of the Steven Lassen playbook here. I went into tiers. I got official rankings, but I also got tiers, if that makes sense. And so I'm going to start. Let's start at the bottom, Steven. Tier 5 is what I'm calling this. Number 16 coach in the SEC. And I don't know how you feel about this, Steven, but it's maybe not accurate. Is probably, but I think it's the only fair way to do it. I'm kind of curious to see if you agree, but I have to put Jeff Lebby here just because he's not won a game yet. He may be marvelous. He may be outstanding. We know what he is as an offensive coordinator. Very good. Quarterback developer, outstanding. But what is he as a head coach? Anybody that tells you, they're lying to you because they don't know. He could be the next Dan Mullen. He could be better than Dan Mullen. He could be the next Chad Morris for all I know. So I have to put him number 16 until we see him. Is that fair? What's your thoughts on that?
That is where I ranked Jeff Lebby too. So we're in agreement. There were 2 coaches I considered for the last spot. I think they're pretty obvious. It's Clark Lee or Jeff Lebby. And I felt like both, if you were to step back and think who was like more highly touted as a coordinator, I think they're both about the same. Like when Clark Lee was at Notre Dame, and at some of his other stops, Jeff Lebby, kind of the same thing. Like both of them were kind of touted about similar. Clark Lee has a little bit more SEC experience at this point. And I think to your point, Jeff Lebby, he's a complete unknown as a head coach. It certainly doesn't mean that he's not going to work out. A lot of upside, I think, with the offense here. I like what they're doing in the portal as far as trying to go out and get a quick fix, bring in some guys who can play right away. And I think he also understands the SEC. He was at Ole Miss. I think the style of play is good for a place like Mississippi State where you need to try and do something a little different. It's a hard job, and it's a hard job for a first-time head coach. Dan Mullen did a great job. Zach Arnett obviously really struggled with that. So I think he's such an unknown at this point. He's got to be 16 for me.
Right. So I think you nailed it too. I got Clark Lee 15th, of course, Vanderbilt head coach. Heck, he's won 2 games in the SEC, Steve. So we got to give him credit for. They were both upsets. One was on the road. Fortunately, he's got 22 losses in the conference too. Now, is that all on Clark Lee? Certainly not. Inherited a dumpster fire. It remains kind of a dumpster fire several years here later. 9-27 overall career record. So Jeff Lebby, I think, could easily pass Clark Lee this year. But I'm not going to put a guy with multiple SEC wins because as bad as people may think Clark Lee is, could be the situation. And we have seen other coaches come into this league can't win a damn SEC game. So the fact that Clark Lee's won multiple at Vanderbilt, I have to give him some kind of credit for that.
I think one of the keys to any kind of coaching list is the hierarchy of which the job you coached in. And that made it to kind of make that a little bit simpler is it's really hard to win at Vanderbilt. I think like SEC fans know that. And so I'm often willing to give a coach like that the benefit of the doubt. And the same thing will be true of Jeff Lebby. If he comes in right away, they show some improvement, he's going to jump a couple spots on this list. So I think you have to give credit to Clark Lee for navigating some very difficult circumstances. The roster wasn't in good shape. We know the facilities are under construction. But we are kind of approaching a pretty critical point for his tenure. I mean, going into year 4, I don't think Vanderbilt can have another 0-8 season, 2-10 overall. I like what they're doing in the transfer portal. I think they're trying to get a lot better right away. It does seem like this is shifting. Like there's got to be some improvement this year, but I think that 5-7 season should carry some weight in this ranking. So that's why I had Clark Lee 15. As we're talking here, I think there is a theme that I've kind of picked up on with these. Think about how much turnover there's been in the league recently. I mean, look, we just go on this list of how many of these guys are just on the job for 3 or 4 years. There's not a lot of longevity in this league. So I just interesting as we're talking, it's just an observation that came to my mind.
Yeah, I'm counting as you say that. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. God, this is incredible, Stephen. If I counted correctly, I think 14 of the 16 were not on the job prior to 2020.
That's
And
what I came up with
so
too. Yeah.
we're in 2024, and we got Stoops and we got Kirby. That's it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
maybe we call for some stability here. I don't know, but I don't think that's going to be happening. But all right, so now I call this Tier 4, and I'll reveal the entire Tier 4 here in a minute. I got number 14, Stephen, Billy Napier, 51 and 26 overall. He's 11 and 14 at Florida. He's 6 and 10 in the SEC. He's 3 and 14 against top 25 competition in his coaching career. So his record overall looks pretty stellar. Stellar is a strong word, but it looks very strong. But I think that is clearly, we got to give him credit for what he did at Louisiana. But the fact that he's 11 and 14 at Florida and 6 and 10 in the SEC, I know they like to throw all the blame on Dan Mullen, but when Dan Mullen took that thing over, it was about where it is today, and he was winning immediately. So I got Billy Napier 14th. Who do you have 14?
I have Sam Pittman at 14. To your point, the next 3 or 4 coaches I really wrestled with. I could make a case for any of these. I think next 3 or 4 at 14. I think one of the reasons why I went with Pittman, I think, is just the trend line. Like the trend line isn't good. To go from 9 and 4 to 7 and 6 to 4 and 8 last year, it felt like the program might have bottomed out a bit last year. So, I mean, I guess the good news is it probably can't be as bad as Chad Morris was if you're Arkansas. Like it probably could get better this year. And Pittman took over the job in 2020 under some pretty difficult circumstances. They got a lot better right away. Like I mentioned, they had the 9-win season. If we did this list like 2 years ago, he's probably much higher. I just think the trend line, and also if I'm stuck in a tier, I always go back to who would I hire if this was a neutral kind of blank slate, knowing what we know about some of these guys. And to your point on Napier, I think his experience at Louisiana and turning that program around would weigh something for me. So I've got Pittman at 14.
Well, that's why I got 13th. And I basically, this may not be fair, Stephen, but Arkansas beat Florida at home last year, so that was kind of the tiebreaker for me. His record is not great: 23 and 25 overall, 11 and 23 in the SEC. He's 6 and 16 against top 25. But again, the records I don't think tell the whole story, Stephen, because at Florida, I think you're expected to win for championships. And the depths that they're currently at, I mean, they're fighting for bowl eligibility. I mean, I think that should be said. Whereas at Arkansas, I know there's a very high standard there as well, but they are at best the 6th best recruiter in a 7-team division up until this point under Sam Pittman. And, there's just realistically, they're not going to beat the teams in front of them consistently, where I think Florida should be doing that, and they are not under Billy Napier, if that makes sense. But I'm splitting hairs here. Sam Pittman, 13, Billy Napier, 14 for me. Who do you have in your number 13?
Should I get out the hazmat suit and duck under the desk and say that I'm going to pick Shane Beamer at 13? Nothing against the good people of South Carolina. We'll have to make up, I guess, as Lenora Sellers tears up the SEC this year. But on Shane Beamer, I mean, to go back to what we said earlier, these 3 coaches, I mean, you could shake them up 3 different ways, and I wouldn't disagree with any of them with you. I think hard to evaluate Shane Beamer this season because of the injuries, because of the difficult schedule. There's a lot that went wrong. So I'm not knocking him too much for 5 and 7 here this season. Obviously, I like what they've done at the end of the year, the last 2 seasons. I like what they're doing recruiting wise, transfer. I think he seems to get the modern era of college football. So the only reason, and this will tip off my hand at 12, the only reason that I went with Billy Napier ahead of both of them is that Napier's had success at another job. and I'm going to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt because of the roster. And this is sort of like, as each game goes on, I start removing that a little bit from the coach ranking. So we're at the point where this year, it's not like after this year, there's no more, I guess, extra credit for taking over a program that was, I guess, in need of a rebuild.
Mm-hmm. All right. So if I read that right, you got Bailey Napier at 12. I have Brent Venables at 12, 16-10 overall, 3-3 against top 25 competition. He's 10-8 in the Big 12. Obviously, no games coached as an SEC head coach. We know what he is as a defensive coordinator. He may have been the best defensive coordinator in the country. As long as you're not counting Kirby and Saban as defensive coordinators, more head coaches. But Venables, again, it's very hard for me to accurately judge him because he's only done it 2 years. He did it in a different league. Certainly much better year two. If they make the strides in year 3 that they made in year 2, this will be one of my dumbest picks on the board. Because we'll have him firmly in the top half of the SEC coaches, but I just can't shoot him up a list because what he did I gotta be honest with you, Stephen, I got no respect for the Big 12. I mean, it's Oklahoma and it's Texas and it's, a bunch of losers surrounded them. So I credit you for beating a lot of those losers. I get it, but this is a different animal you're stepping into. Could you at least see my logic here in putting Brent Venables number 12?
Yeah, I do. I'll tip my hand a little bit here. I've got Venables one spot ahead, so I've got him at 11 coming up here. I think, and I hate to kind of mention this again, like the fact that there's been so much turnover in the league, and like a lot of these, I'm sitting here and agonizing over whether they should be 13, 12, 11. There's not much separation here. So really you could juggle these a couple different ways. But I think one thing I like about Brent Venables, and I think he was a defensive coordinator, like you said, for a long time, who waited his turn at a job like Oklahoma. And I think as cliche as it sounds, I think this is kind of a job, number one, that meant a lot to him. I think he understands what it takes to win there. And I think he also understands what it's going to take to get Oklahoma SEC ready. And so I think they're entering the SEC on much more solid footing. You look at the growth, and I think that's one of the reasons why I have him 11 is 6-7 to 10-3, 4-game jump in wins. It is the Big 12, to your point. It is a little bit easier to do that. But I think you also look at what he's doing off the field, recruiting, understanding where they're going to have to staff up, where they're going to have to build, and recruiting. That's kind of why I went with him at 11. Is just the track record of DC, and also the success as a head coach, and going from 6-7 to 10-3 this year.
Right. Yeah, so I give you a hard time about Shane Beamer. I got him number 11 here, so not far off. He's 20-18 overall, 10-14 in SEC. But this is rough, Stephen. He's a 3-11 against top 25 competition. Obviously not great, but he is at South Carolina. He's building it up. Took it over for Will Muschamp, who may be a good assistant, but an awful head coach. So there's a lot of work to be done. The thing I like about Beamer, Stephen, he's not losing many games that he is projected to win. And he has obviously gotten a couple big upsets. Needs to have a little bit more of them, I think, to calm the fan base a little bit. But I think, it's kind of hard to say. We can't just give him a mulligan for an entire season of football or anything. But I think his stock was a lot hotter a year ago. And I think the truth is somewhere in between. To your point, I mean, he's maybe a little low now. He was a little maybe too high. I think he's more right smack dab in the middle. And this is why I say, Stephen, I would never hire anybody. I don't care who it is. And I know Kirby worked out, Dan Mullen it worked out. Good for them. I would not hire a guy that has no head coaching experience to come into this league, because this is what happens. They have to learn how to do it. And you have these up and downs. And that's fine at some places, but in the SEC, 2 down years, your ass is gone. And it'll happen to Beamer. If he goes 4-8 next year, they'll fire him. Now, is that right? I don't know. I mean, his again, it's not a perfect comparison, but his father had an awful record for 5-6 years, and he's the greatest coach in the history of Virginia Tech. So, I mean, sometimes we need to give these guys a little bit of time, but with what they're making, what people are paying for tickets, I get it. We're not giving anybody a time, but just firing people and bringing in another unproven is just not a strategy for success. I don't think when you have a coach here that has shown can recruit and has proven that he can pull an upset or two.
Yeah, it's funny as you mentioned the upsets there. I almost started to think, man, I screwed up in having him too low. And then the second part of your answer there made me think I was just about right on his ranking. So I don't know. I think to your point though, I think at a place like South Carolina, there has to be some patience. I mean, it is really hard. You're not going to out recruit Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Texas. The list can go on. So you do need to have some patience there. And I think, like I mentioned on Venables, I think it was pretty clear Shane Beamer wanted this job when he was hired. It was a job that he coveted. I think he understands sort of that modern transfer NIL era of college football very well. So I think he's, I had him 13 in my list. I still think he's a very good, he could easily be top 30 in college football. It sort of just speaks to how many quality coaches are in here, and he could be a spot or two higher. Honestly, if they probably went to a bowl game this year, he probably would be a spot or two higher on my list. So maybe maybe I put too much stock in 5 and 7 this season, but you're always in the SEC one loss away from the hot seat. So to your point, next year, 2024 is very important for Shane Beamer.
So that completes my tier 4, Stephen. Brent Venables, Oklahoma, Sam Pittman, Arkansas, Billy Napier, Florida, Shane Beamer, South Carolina. So really, in my mind, there's not a ton of difference, to your point, in a lot of these guys. Is there anyone that you would toss into the tier 4 if you were tiering it?
I think that's how I would tier them as well. I think any of those 11 through 14, you could maybe shake these up a little. Like I said, you could shake them up a little different, and I wouldn't disagree with you. I think maybe the other kind of quantifier here is like, this is subjective. Like I really don't put a ton of stock in sort of like the head-to-head matchups between coaches sometimes, because I'm sort of gauging them in program overall. But if you wanted to kind of drill down a little bit more specifically, you could probably like you mentioned with the sort of some of the results this season. So no disagreement on my end. I think those are the same tier I had.
All right, so now we're going into tier 3, and again, I'll reveal the complete tier when I get to it here. But I got number 10 on my list, Stephen. Mark Stoops at Kentucky, 73 and 65 overall, 35 and 55 in SEC play. That's awful. 15 and 25 against top 25. He's 1 and 18 against top 10. But again, he is at Kentucky, and he's 20 and 52 against teams that finish 500 or better. Who do you have at number 10?
I think the next couple coaches are pretty much a toss-up in my book. I had the next 3 all agonizing for hours over which one to pick. I settled on Hugh Freeze. I think, first of all, the vibes around Auburn right now are a little weird for me with all the coaching turnover. The recruiting class was great. The end of the season where they almost beat Alabama, but they got pummeled in the bowl game by Maryland was kind of weird. First season back, obviously, Alabama, Georgia games, almost upsets, but a no-show against New Mexico State. Weird season at Auburn. The good thing is I think Hugh Freeze is going to be very good at accumulating talent, building through the high school ranks. I am a little bit concerned about the assistant coaches, coordinator changes, so that'll be something to watch in 2024. He's won in the SEC before. I think the question is, in this era of the SEC in 2024, with the changes that's gone on in the league, can Hugh Freeze do it again? So I've got him 10th, but if you had him 8th, I really wouldn't argue with you.
Yeah, I mean, I debated it as well. I got Freeze number 9, and in transparency, I had him number 10 at first, but he's won a couple big games. They get up for the big games. Gravedigger, Georgia this year, several others, that escaped me at the time. But of course, we all know he beat Bama twice. He also lost to Vanderbilt twice. So it's just that's why I call it the Hugh Freeze experience. It's completely up and down. He's 45 and 32 as Ole Miss and Auburn head coach. His record's really good if you count Liberty and Arkansas State and where was a Lamb Booth or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. I don't care about any of that. He's 22 and 26 in SEC play, and that's no vacated games there. That's his record. He's a losing coach in the SEC. I don't think his reputation warrants much better than that. I mean, he's controversial. I get it. Even at Stephen, maybe you could weigh in on this, but at Liberty, it's to his credit because he was wildly successful. I'm not knocking him, but he changed what he did. It was not the high flying RPO pass all over the yard, and it's not been that at Auburn. Now, of course, I think it's very easy to say, well, they didn't have the quarterback, they didn't have the receivers, so maybe once he gets that, he will go back to it. But credit him for adapting. But at the same time, this is to your point. I mean, is he a fit for this age of college football? That remains to be seen. And I have serious reservations after watching year one and now cleaning house all these assistants that, again, I'm sure they'll do much better than they did this year, but I don't think there's any guarantee he ever wins 10 games in a single season at Auburn. Do you think that's fair?
That's probably where I would land. I really think that if they continue to stack top 8 recruiting classes, they're probably going to end up with probably one at some point. But I go back to what we were talking about just a minute ago with the coaching changes and stuff. I mean, you can't cycle through your whole coaching staff every off season. So I think it's incumbent on him to get it right. I think maybe a argument in favor of Hugh Freeze this year would be the fact that, Peyton Thorne was not really much of a running quarterback at Michigan State, but they tweaked the offense to utilize his strengths and they almost pulled off 2 upsets. So I think maybe in the question of can they adapt? Can they win in this modern era of the SEC? I think they maximize maybe what they had. I still think the issues in the passing game were a little perplexing, considering Peyton Thorne was not that bad of a passer at Michigan State, and they did have some talent at receiver. So there's a lot of puzzling things there. Does it get easier for Auburn in the no divisions SEC in the future?
Not if they're still playing Alabama and Georgia annually.
Yeah. But hey, there's no Nick Saban now,
right?
So,
but there's another guy up there. Right. All right, I got number 8. I got Eli Drakowitz, Stephen, 28 and 21 overall, 17 and 17 in SEC play, 6 and 11 against top 25 competition, and I believe this record I have for him here. I could be mistaken, but I do not believe it counts his 1 year at Appalachian here. So his overall record might actually be better than what I just cited here. But a little bit of a one-hit wonder. I think it's fair to say. I mean, they haven't had a winning season till now, but the trajectory of this program is incredible. I mean, they should win 10 games again next season. I really think, just looking at the schedule.
Yeah, I think for Drakowitz, I think the argument in favor of him is that it took a couple years to get things going, and when it hit big. And it is going to be tough to replicate top 10 finishes next year and probably the year after at Missouri. But you will take one top 10 finish every 3 seasons, and I think also Drakowitz is getting but we've mentioned it, but the transfer, the NIL, the recruiting, like the roster building aspect of this modern era of college football. The only thing I think the argument against him would be App State was 1 year, and App State has been very good, and it's sort of just been next coach keeps winning, and at Missouri just the 1 year. So I think it's kind of a case of you like the trajectory, but also there's not a lot of necessarily long-term data to say that he's going to be the 8th or 7th best coach in the SEC.
Right. Now here, I struggled. I didn't know where to put this guy. The Mizzou fans are going to bitch and moan that I got this guy over Drink, but I got Mike Elko, number 7. 16 and 9 overall. Not great, but again, he was taking over Duke, which was just awful when he got there. 9 and 7 in the ACC, 1 and 4 against top 25. Had his quarterback not got hurt this year, I think they would have won a lot more games. But this is a coveted guy. I don't think he would have left for just any old job, but I think he clearly understands the potential of Texas A&M, and I think he's one I think I'm buying the stock low, and he could be a top 5 coach in the SEC before very long if he realizes the potential of that place. And the beauty of it is, he doesn't have to be some genius. He's a great coach with potentially elite talent, and that could be a lethal combination for the rest of the SEC.
Yeah, I think if there's a coach that I'm going to buy some stock in, well, probably two. I think Mike Oko's one. The other one is probably going to be Shane Beamer to move up this list a little bit by next season. But I think on Mike Oko specifically, I think everything is there at Texas A&M to win. It says somebody just has to take all that potential, turn it into production, and turn it into wins. And when you and I talked after the job was open, we talked about how Texas A&M just needs somebody to get their hands dirty, do the hard work, and get the program to where it needs to be. I don't think Mike Elko is a big talker. Like, I don't think we're going to hear much talk about expectations and this and that and fake national championship plaques. He's just going to do the work. And that's why I think I'm buying some stock as well. I mean, you mentioned his record at Duke. Duke was awful. I mean, as much as David Cutcliffe is a very beloved figure at a couple of different programs, his last team was horrible. And they got a lot better in Mike Oko's first season, and they would have finished better last season if they didn't have to go to their third-string quarterback after Riley Leonard and some other guys got hurt. So a guy that came into a very hard place and won right away, I think I'll buy some stock at a job that has a ton of resources and a ton of talent.
So does that match your list? Is that who you have 7 as well?
I had Eli Drinkowitz at 7.
Gotcha.
I like I said, I wrestled with 7, 8, 9. 9, I went with Mark Stoops. I like the longevity, winningest coach in Kentucky history. 2 10 seasons. Kentucky's had 4 seasons of double-digit victories. He's had 2 of them. Little bit concerned about the ongoing offensive coordinator, quarterback problems, having to dip into the portal, going to find coordinators. You'd like to see a little bit of stability, a little bit of homegrown quarterback talent. Fair to wonder, maybe if he's tapped the potential of Kentucky at this point, like, can it get better from this point? It's a back-to-back 7-win season. So I'll be curious to see where kind of Mark Stoops goes. I had Elko at 8, Drinkowitz 7. I could flip those two, to be honest with you. I went with Drinkowitz largely because they just kind of had the breakthrough season this year and finishing in the top 10.
Now, here's where I think we're going to disagree, because I'm trying to win these fans over. But, hey, I got to keep it real here, Stephen. I've just never been a big Steve Sarkisian fan. And that's not to say he's awful, but I got him number 6. He's 71-49 overall. He's 2-4 in bowl games. He has coached for 10 football seasons, Stephen. He's got 2 where he's won 9 or more games. And that includes, in fairness to him, and that includes this year. They won big. But I kind of feel like really a missed opportunity, Stephen. I thought they should have beat Washington, should have played for that national championship. And who knows? I mean, they could have beat Michigan. Now, would they? I have no idea. But they should have at least made that game. I mean, that's a sign of coaching issue right there. Let's call it what it is, Stephen. In the Big 12, there's only 2 teams there that are in the same profile talent, and it's Oklahoma and Texas. And he lost to Oklahoma. Now, he should beat every single one of the other ones. And until this year, he never did that. So, again, I'm not saying he's awful. I'm putting him 6th in a 16-team league. I just think he's underperformed as a head coach, elite offensive coordinator, maybe the best in the country, play caller, game designer, all this. I remember I asked you specifically, Stephen, DeBoer, Sarkisian, a month to prepare. Who's going to have their team more prepared? You said Sarkisian. I said, okay, buddy. But again, to me, I don't know. I don't get the love affair. Again, he's solid. He's not elite, not in my opinion. What say you on that?
I've got Sarkisian higher than you. I will tell you though, I think Sarkisian was his own worst enemy in that Sugar Bowl, because I would have called a running play like 30, I don't know how many times in a row, almost did the Michigan to Penn State thing until Washington. You're just not going to stop us, because they should have been able to push him around like Michigan did in the national championship game. But anyways, I'll make the case for Sarkisian to be higher. I think the fact that, he had a chance to go into the Nick Saban kind of minor league system as an analyst and then as an offensive coordinator. I think he understood the process. I think he came away with that a much better coach. He goes to Texas, and yeah, it did take him some time. 5 wins, 8 to 12 this year. Much improved every season. And also, I think as they go into the SEC, Texas is equipped. They've got the offensive line that should be one of the best in the country. They're equipped with 2 quarterbacks they can win with, Ewers or Arch Manning. He's recruiting at a high level. They're reaching that territory where Georgia and Alabama are, where players are going to cycle out. The next wave is coming in. They're navigating the portal well with some of the losses too. So I think you look back at his career, obviously USC thing. I think he's grown from that. Washington was bad before he got there. He's won at Texas. I've got him higher. I've got him third in the SEC, but I'll be honest with you. The top 6, I should say 2 through 5 was difficult to rank. So I can't really disagree with you. I just think I would have him a little bit higher from the track record of Texas.
So you got him 3. Who do you have at 6?
I've got Josh Heupel at 6. I will say, I think sketching this out in my mind, if Josh Heupel's the 6th best coach in the SEC, he's probably like top 12, top 13, 14 nationally. It goes to show you, I think all these guys are pretty dang good. I think I'll kind of touch on Heupel, and you can feel free to tell me if I'm wrong here. I think plenty of questions when he came to the SEC. How would he recruit? How would they put the defense on the field to compete with the offense? I think so far so good. I think the question is now, can Tennessee reach that level that Georgia, Texas, LSU, like those teams that we feel year in and year out are becoming sort of that operation where they lose players, they cycle through the next wave. Like, can Tennessee get back to being double-digit wins consistently? Obviously, the offense was great. I actually think that this year's scoring, 31.8 points a game, is his lowest as an FBS head coach, yet they went 9-4. So I think to his credit, they found a way to win when they weren't as high-powered offensively as they have been, which also bodes well for the future. And, I think he's answered all the questions. He's won at Tennessee. High-powered offense. Not really a ton of questions for me about Heupel, so you can tear me apart for putting him at 6.
Well, I will in just a moment, Stephen, but that completes my tier 3. I should have said Sark, Drink, Stoops, Elko, Hugh Freeze. Those are the guys I have in tier 3. So tier 2, most underrated coach in the country, according to Stephen's rankings, Josh Heupel. Come on, top 5 in the SEC. He's 55-20 overall. 14-10 in the SEC, 9-10 overall as against top 25. I see a lot of what you're saying, and one concern I have about Heupel is staffing. I don't know if he's handling it right with receivers coach goes to the NFL, hires from within. Offensive coordinator takes over South Florida, hires from within. Tight end coach opening, hires from within. I don't know if you're hiring quality coaches or you're here. Surely he's not just hiring his buddies, but that many coaches do. You better hope that's not the answer. I mean, I think maybe he just has such a belief in his system. He would rather hire someone that has an intimate knowledge of it so he doesn't have to get those guys up to speed. That's perhaps, I mean, that's the only argument, but look at what you just said. Lowest output of his career. And he's got a questionable OC, tight end coach, receiver coach. And I know the receiver coach is a good recruiter. They've developed some nice receivers. So maybe that's not fair to say that. And now fans they want to run the offensive line coach off because they can't recruit on the offensive line. So who has he surrounded himself with? That is a big question I have for Heupel. If Tennessee's going to take that next step, he may have to surround himself with some better developers of talent and some killers on the recruiting trail, because I don't think they quite have that at Tennessee. Now, I guess that kind of cuts both ways. You could say, well, he's got a bunch of dummies around him and he's elite, so maybe he could be even higher on this list. But I think the hope is, again, I'm not going to sit here and bash Joe Milton because he was an average Heupel quarterback, but he was still probably a top 25 quarterback in the country. if they have a top 10 quarterback in the country, like once again, which Nico could be even better than that, I think they're back to high flying again. So again, we're kind of splitting hairs here. I got them fifth. You got them sixth. I wouldn't. I don't have a big concern with you putting Heupel six after losing at Florida, getting embarrassed by Missouri, second half against Alabama, getting outclassed by Georgia. I mean, that's gotta knock you at some point.
I think on your concern about the offensive staff, I think fair to be, I think, concerned about that if you're a Tennessee fan. And also I think you want to see Tim Banks continue to take this defense up a notch a little bit. I will say I'm not as worried about offense because I think Josh Heupel's sort of the mastermind. If as long as he's there, then I don't necessarily worry about the other coaches too much. You don't want a bunch of guys who can't recruit. You don't want to hire your friends. Ask Jimbo Fisher about that. That probably won't work out too well for him in the long term. So I think it's fair to wonder long term, does he have the right people around him? I do think Tennessee will benefit from Nick Saban retiring quite a bit. If they continue to play annually every year, 8-9 games, whatever it is, I think that matchup gets a lot more winnable for Tennessee when they don't have to play Nick Saban, as history has shown recently. So, yeah. Do you think you agree on Tim Banks? I think he's done a good job, but still, I think there needs to be another level that this group gets to.
Yeah, that's fair. But he was very criticized this year. But to your point, I'm going to pull up the schedule real quick. For Tennessee, just look at some of these games. We're criticizing the defense. They scored 16 against Florida, 20 against A&M, and 7 of that was a punt return. 20 against Alabama, all in the first half. They scored 7 against Mizzou, 10 against Georgia. That's not on the defense. I think the defense is doing good enough for them to win 10, 11 games again. At least they did this year.
I think that's fair. I think that goes back to the kind of the numbers we were talking about. This is one of Josh Heupel's worst offenses, yet they still found a way to go 9-4. And also, I think very broadly, I think Heupel has sort of restored Tennessee to sort of national prominence. It's not there yet as far as being a playoff contender. Maybe it will get there in the 12-team era. But, Tennessee had so much turnover. They had the crazy coaching searches a couple times and all the athletic director turnover. It feels like Tennessee's got its stuff together now. And I think Heupel's a big reason, a big part of that, I should say.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, I got number 4, Stephen. I got Lane Kiffin. Whiffin Kiffin up here. 95-49 overall. 24-17 in SEC play. That includes going back to his Tennessee time, which may or may not be fair. I don't know. I don't care. First 11-win season in Ole Miss history. Ole Miss has never had a 10-win regular season. He's done it twice now, Stephen. But, again, he can't beat Georgia, can't beat Alabama, but vast majority of people can't beat them either. So I don't know how much you hold that against Lane Kiffin. But number 4, Ole Miss, SEC contender, national championship contender, I think. Next season, the pieces are in place for a historically good season. But they're going to need Kiffin to perform at his best here. Are you buying? Who do you got number 4 in the SEC?
I actually have Kalen DeBoer at number 4. I have Kiffin at 5. So they're back-to-back, basically. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. Kiffin's not anywhere close to the hot seat, but I also think you could make a case that he's got a ton of pressure on him next year. Because if you go all in on transfers and you got your quarterback coming back and Quinshad Judkins transferred, your team's in place clearly to win in 2024. So if you don't deliver, it's going to be a massive disappointment. So I like everything that Kiffin has done at Ole Miss. You mentioned the statistics on getting to double-digit wins this season. The next step is, can they close that gap to the top of the SEC? Can they close the gap to Georgia? With, like we mentioned, with Nick Saban retiring, this might get a little bit easier. But there's an opportunity here in 2024 for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. So I think pressure's on him. but all the pieces are in place, and I think you have to like the track record so far in Oxford.
Mm-hmm. So number 3, I've got Brian Kelly, LSU. I mean, just an incredible record if you can count all his time at Grand Valley. I think he was already the winningest coach in NCAA, even with Saban. But again, that's a lot of that's Division II, two-time Division II champion, 2 playoff appearances though for Notre Dame, 1 BCS national champion. It was even tougher back in. Of course, he lost that one in dramatic fashion. So I don't know how much credit we give, but I mean, I kid. I mean, that's incredibly difficult to reach that. But 34-34 against top 25. Longevity's there. I think he's done a much better job than even I anticipated at LSU, winning 20 games in 2 seasons. Of course, that's more or less the standard, but he has exceeded it. But I'm a little concerned. I love these coaches, the hires he's made on the defensive side of the ball, Stephen. I love them across the board. I think he's killing it. They just added Corey Raymond to go with Blake Baker, obviously, Bo Davis, Peoples. I mean, they have an all-star defensive staff. But that should have been the staff to begin with. I mean,
yeah,
we blame him for that as well. And again, I don't want to get into the Notre Dame people hate Brian Kelly now just because he spurned them, I guess. But starting to see some of what they're talking about. I mean, I think he's great. But how is there a ceiling there? There clearly was at Notre Dame. There is no ceiling at LSU. So championship or bust at some point during his career. And I would argue, despite these defensive hires, Stephen, I think year 3, they're poised to be taking a step back, which they may not. But I don't know. An elite coach at an elite program should not be taking a step back year 3. And maybe I'm just looking at it because all the pieces they're losing on offense, and they'll find a way to manufacture another 10-win season. But I'm a slightly concerned about if they take a step back where Kelly would rank for me.
Yeah, he's at an interesting spot because, like you mentioned, it does feel like not necessarily a crossroads moment for LSU, but they've had the great offense, and now the defense is sort of lagged behind. Can they fix the defense while also overcoming some of those losses on offense? And I think offensively, they're still going to be very good with Garrett Nussmeier, but they also have to get a new coordinator, a new play caller, but they're probably not going to be as dynamic. So can you catch up defensively to make up for those offensive losses in a year where you still have questions in your secondary, you still have questions up front after losing Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo? So I think it's fair to wonder, question sort of not necessarily direction, but kind of where is LSU going into this year? I do think at Notre Dame there was a bit of a ceiling, facilities, recruiting, I think a little bit more limited there. At LSU, to your point, I mean, the facilities, the resources to go out and pay big bucks to go bring in Blake Baker and Bo Davis. I mean, Brian Kelly has the pocketbook to go get whatever he needs. You have great talent in Louisiana and Texas to go recruit from. So there are no excuses. Like if they finish 9-3 consistently for the next 3 years, I think that'd be a massive disappointment. But I think on the positive side, he has won at every stop, and the longevity in college football to do that is really hard, because you think about how many things have changed in college football since 2015 to now. To go back to when Brian Kelly, even before then, was at Grand Valley State and Central Michigan, I think that's a sign of a pretty dang good coach. So I had Brian Kelly at 2, but I think also this is a very kind of important season to kind of see the overall kind of path of LSU.
Mm-hmm. And I got DeBoer at 2, and that completes my tier 2. So I got Heupel, Kiffin, Kelly, and DeBoer at 2. But the fact, Stephen, and maybe I'm off my rocker here, but that I got this guy that's got 2 years of coaching at the Power 5 level as the second best coach in the SEC. I think that really speaks to the lack of star power, like we said, the massive turnover. He's 104-12 overall. He was in the Pac-12 for just 2 seasons, but he was 2-time Pac-12 Coach of the Year, 12-2 against top 25 opponents, 3-0 versus Dan Lanning, 2-0 against Steve Sarkisian. Both, I would argue, had significantly better overall rosters. I mean, the fact that the guy's 12-2 against top 25, and I'm not going to pretend like I sat and watched all those games, but I would tend to believe, given what I know, that he had the probably the worst roster, and or worse is not the right word, but not as nearly as good a roster in probably every one of those matchups. Yet the fact he's 12-2, I mean, it speaks to his coaching. Is it crazy to put a guy that's got 2 years of Power Five here, Alabama's head coach, as the second best in the SEC in a 16-team league?
I wish I could say like this is crazy and like we could debate this, but honestly, I don't. Like I think that's kind of the thing we were getting at the beginning is, you have Brian Kelly, Steve Sarkisian, DeBoer, Kiffin, Heupel. You could make a compelling case for maybe any of those at 2, any of those at 6 if you wanted to knock Kalen DeBoer. He just hasn't done it in the SEC. I think fit is very overrated when you choose a head coach. Like just because Kalen DeBoer has never spent he's never stepped into a Jim and Nick's barbecue in Alabama to recruit or wherever. I mean, that doesn't matter. Like I think the biggest thing that matters for Kalen DeBoer is that he has won at every level, and he's been successful, whether he's been an offensive coordinator or a head coach. He goes to Washington. They were awful in before he got there. They were markedly better in the last 2 years. So it feels like that second spot is wide open, and you could make a pretty compelling case for any of them, I guess, at this point.
Now, I really wanted to ask you this, Steve, because I think this is the true challenge in front of DeBoer. I think given if he's as near as good a coach as I believe he is, and he just kind of displayed at Washington, and I just made the point, he's never had this type of talent. Well, I guess there's two challenges. One is just working with this level of talent. It's in the NIL era. I mean, in the SEC, that is a challenge, but I don't think it's something they can't overcome. I think given his coaching acumen and the roster he's inherited, despite some losses via the portal, and we'll see if there's more, but barring some mass exodus, this is going to be significantly better than any roster he's ever had to work with. I think they can win the national championship now. And I think they can win the national championship maybe I'm not saying they're going to win 2 in a row. That'd be kind of crazy. But I think the challenge is maintaining. Because year 3, year 4, we're going to really find out about this DeBoer and where Alabama is and the trajectory of this program, because there's only one Nick Saban. I mean, it's been said to death, but maybe that's not even the best place to look. But, I mean, just look around the sport, Stephen. I mean, Urban Meyer was kicking ass at Ohio State, at Florida. He couldn't sustain it. LSU, they've not been able to sustain it under any coaches. Miami, they may have had the best collection of athletes ever. They could not sustain it. Southern Cal, under Pete Carroll, I know there were circumstances, but could not sustain it. I think it's easier to get to the mountaintop, and they're already there. Of course, he didn't do any of the heavy lifting. He just showed up. But I think it's significantly harder to stay there. And I think that's the true test of Kalen DeBoer is where Alabama will be in 2 seasons, 3 seasons. Would you agree with any of that?
Yeah, I would. I think it goes back to 2 things. I think the only negatives you could point out about Kalen DeBoer is that he's never been a head coach at the FBS level for very long at one stop. 2 years at Fresno, 2 years at Washington. He's very good at taking over a program and quickly getting things better. But can he sustain that in the SEC? That's a big question. And it also plays into the other question, which is recruiting. That's really the only question that I have about him. His classes at Washington weren't that great. I think it'll be a little bit easier to recruit to Alabama, but I love the fact that he's gone out and got Kane Womack and Maurice Lindquist. Sitting power FBS head coaches are coming to Tuscaloosa to work on his staff. So I think he realizes the blind spot, and I think that's an area that as long as Alabama's not going to put up with the 8th best class. You have to start beating top 3 classes. You have to beat Kirby Smart for players. So that's what I'm watching for. I'm watching, I think, recruiting. I also think that anything short of a playoff appearance next year is a big disappointment. Just based upon track record and talent. So I think year 3, year 4, I think to your point is a big question. I think they should make the playoff next year. The coaching transition doesn't really matter to me in this case. They've got the talent, and DeBoer's track record tells me that they should be very good next year again.
Right. So then obviously tier one, the only coach I got up here, Stephen, and as do you, Kirby Smart, 94-16 overall. My goodness, 56-9 in SEC play, 33-12 against top 25 competition. He's 9-2 in bowl games, Stephen. And keep in mind, all but one of those 11, so 10 games are New Year's Six or playoff games. And he's 9-2 in them. I mean, short of a 2-up miracle, and that's one of them right there. I mean, this is as elite gets. If he coaches another 15 years at Georgia, he may smash all of Nick Saban's records. Now, again, sustaining, that'll be critical, but I think he is far and away the best coach in the SEC right now. He's probably the best coach in the country. By any metric. He's certainly the best recruiter, which recruiting matters more than anything in my mind. And I mean, Kirby's on top of the mountain here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I don't think there was of these ranking these coaches, the easiest one, put Kirby Smart in at one, and you can do that nationally too. He's the best coach in college football. We're at that point too, where you could do the same thing that we did for Alabama, which is you could look at their losses and go, man, they lost one time in 2021 when Bryce Young had an unbelievable game in the SEC championship game. It took like a Herculean effort to beat Georgia that day. And then they went out and beat Alabama in the national championship game. I know Alabama had some missing receivers in that game too. 2023, it took Alabama, one of the better efforts we've seen out of Alabama this year to win that game, but they still, I think you could make case Georgia was still on a neutral field to be the one team you would not want to play if there was like a 12-team playoff. So the last 3 years are pretty dang impressive, but it's also the growth over the time of Georgia transforming this program from 8-5 in 2016 to a consistent national championship contender. Georgia's only going to be even more of a factor in the 12-team playoff because they're not going to miss it. So their schedule's difficult, I know, next year, but good luck to the rest of college football trying to slow down Georgia in the near future.
Yeah, and having a difficult schedule, credit to some of these ADs. They knew it was coming. Of course, if they rack up too many losses, it'll be bad. But again, if Georgia goes 11-1, 10-2, still wins the SEC, or even if they don't, they're getting in. It'll be good to be battle tested, I would think, heading into this 12-team playoff. You know what?
Completely different story than this year where Georgia's schedule was pretty soft. And this year they're going to be one of the tougher schedules. So if they go, I mean, you think about, obviously it's down the road and it's a long way to go, but you think about the path. If Georgia's schedule ends up being that difficult and they navigate a 12-team playoff to win the national championship, and that's got to be one of the tougher paths. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves for 2024, but just thinking about the path for Georgia and how difficult that could be next season. Also, I think Georgia is one of the big winners in Nick Saban retiring. Like it removed an obstacle for Georgia. Like we mentioned, two out of the last two losses by Georgia came to Alabama, and now Kirby Smart doesn't have to deal with Nick Saban.
Right. Yeah. Everybody's a winner but Bama fans with the retirement. But
Washington did not win.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
All right, Steven. So, hey, we went a little bit long on this one. Any closing thoughts before we hop off the line?
Man, I think the things that I'm going to be looking for over the next few weeks, things like staffing, things like the transfer portal, are still very much kind of in those two seasons. So spring ball is a long way off, but we got a few weeks to kind of fine tune the roster. So just curious to see if there's any more big coaching moves like that. You mentioned, Kalen DeBoer getting Maurice Lindquist and Kane Womack. Interested to see how Alabama rounds out its staff because we'll get a better look at these teams for 2024.
Yeah, the news never stops, Stephen. And at some point, this transfer portal will close up. I don't know when that will be, but as soon as Harbaugh leaves, it's going to open up. Whoever replaces, they get to replace him, and so on and so forth. The dominoes will continue to go, but I can't wait to cover it all here on that SEC podcast. Before you go, Stephen, as always, can you tell the audience where can they follow you? Where can they find your work?
Absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at AflonSteven. You can also check out all my work on YouTube at AllCFB365. And you can follow me on Instagram at StephenLCFB. Be sure to tell me what states I'm not allowed to visit after South Carolina. That's okay.
Yeah. And hey, if you made it this far, please like and subscribe to the video. I appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out. We'll catch you on the next one.